Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 75 with Ryan Dumapit.
And I know you and I have had this discussion too about baking part-time, where I kind of have to figure it out. Like, is it really worth it, the time that I'm putting in, and what am I getting out of it at the end of the day? And honestly, it's a headache looking every week. You're lining up all these orders. Maybe it's only 1 or 2 orders a week, and then you're sinking a certain amount of your overhead into renting a place. I don't know how some of these home bakers do it. I'm assuming that for most of these people, it's supplemental, but I don't know, how a lot of people are, making huge profits from doing this just on a part-time level.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On this show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, R&D chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category, as I started my personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 10 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in 1992, surprisingly, I have literally never worked in a restaurant. On this week's show, I have Ryan Dumapit. Full disclosure here, Ryan's one of my oldest friends. He was my roommate in culinary school, and he was the best man at my wedding. I wanted to talk to Ryan about his path in the food and beverage industry. He has his associate's degree in pastry arts and his bachelor's degree in food service management. But Ryan doesn't have a singular path in the food industry. In fact, he also went to school for IT and has worked for a point-of-sale company as well as a fitness company. We talk about many of the positions he's held, including being a district manager for a contract food service company and working logistics for a large grocery chain. He also partnered with a mutual friend of ours, Jeffrey Wiersbicki, on a catering project called Fil Amazing Foods, as well as his own desserts company called KCB's. Unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic, both of these ventures have been put on hold for a while. Ryan is a first-generation Filipino American, so we talk about Filipino food and his experiences growing up. And you'll also hear him talk about job choices and the struggle of doing something you love for a career versus having a job that can pay the bills. I know that's something a lot of people in the culinary industry can relate to. I hope you enjoy the show, and if you love it, please subscribe and consider signing up for the Chefs Without Restaurants weekly newsletter. You can find the link in the show notes or go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to sign up. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Hey, welcome to the show, Ryan. How's it going?
It's going great, man. Good to see you. Wish it was in person, but I guess this will do for now. Thank God for technology, right?
Thank God for technology. How long has it been? I haven't seen you, it seems like ages. It's been a few years, unfortunately. We'll have to fix that.
Yeah. I think the last time was when we had, when I was in DC in town for business.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. You did get to travel down this way a little bit.
Yes. And then that's the night that, we ate a lot.
The night of
for free.
Yeah, the night of 2 dinners. Yeah, I know. It's very rare, when you walk by Rose's Luxury, if there's an open table, you got to go in and snatch it up for sure.
Yeah, and it was a rare, warm fall night too, right?
Yeah, I love fall. And yeah, we ate outside. We sat outside for 3 hours and just had course after course and food and drink, and that was pretty good.
Definitely miss it, and hopefully we get to see each other soon.
Yeah. So for all our listeners out there, full disclosure, Ryan was my roommate in college. We've lived together for the better part of 4 years, and we were the best men in each other's weddings. So Ryan and I go way back. So another Johnson & Wales alum here. So we were just talking before we started rolling that 26 years now?
About,
yeah.
26, 27 years. It's crazy.
Wow. So let's kind of start with your culinary background. So you're from New Jersey and you ended up going to Johnson & Wales for pastry arts.
Yes.
So how did you end up getting into food? Were you always interested in food and specifically baking? Like, when did you know you wanted to go to culinary school?
I think from at high school is where I really where I wanted to take that jump into culinary school. I've always been into food. I grew up in the kitchen with my grandmother. She's always cooking or making something, so I was always fascinated by it. She'd let me help her out. I think the first thing that I can remember her teaching me how to cook, because I wanted them so badly, were pancakes and like breakfast food. And then high school, my junior year, at that point, I believe I was in FBLA, and the advisor was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I've always been fascinated by food, more in the baking aspect of it, though." And she recommended, that I look into Johnson and Wales as well as CIA. I looked into both, and then, as you know, with the application process with CIA at that time, I don't know what it is like now, but they really wanted you to work first and then apply or get in. That's how they admitted, I guess, back in the day, where Johnson and Wales was kind of like, oh, you could take anybody kind of off the street and hopefully teach them how to be a chef, or at least get them in the door to being a chef. So I went with Johnson and Wales, did the 2-year program with culinary, thought that was it.
Well, and you did baking, so it wasn't even culinary. Your 2 years was just baking and pastry, right? You had no savory cooking courses.
Not at all. So, and all the savory stuff that I've picked up has been through, guys like you and our friends in common. So that's where I've picked up and then, just general experience in the industry is where I picked up the savory stuff in recent years. But, I thought 96, when we did the associates part of the program, I thought that was it for me. I actually worked got a job at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, working for Tom Vaccaro, and worked there for a little bit. But then at the end of the summer, decided to, come back and finish at the other 2 years, but this time on the management aspect of things, and got my bachelor's in food service management from school. So and then from there, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because I know you, it seems like you almost had like I don't want to say a mini meltdown, but like, what happened that you graduated from culinary school with a pastry degree and worked so little and left? And I know that summer you worked and did your thing with no plans to come back. How did you decide to come back to school? Because I remember that summer, and it was just, you seemed to be on the path to start a career in pastry, and then it was very short-lived before you went back to school and decided to get into, the business side. So what happened there? What triggered that?
I think for me, and me, I've always kind of had like an entrepreneurial spirit, coming up more conceptual. I've always been into like business, and as much as I love pastry, and I still love it, and we can go into the pastry stuff later on in this in the podcast. I just felt that I needed to go in that direction first, and that I could always go back to pastry if I really wanted to. And I at that time I thought I knew what I wanted, but you're 20, right?
Yeah.
And you think or you think you know what you want, but you really don't. So and that's why I kind of went back to school and kind of round myself with the business aspect of the business.
Yeah, that was, I think that was a good decision. For me, I don't know if I had to do it again. Let's just say I went back to culinary school like Johnson & Wales. I think getting more training in business would be a smart idea. I mean, I did the 4-year culinary program, and there's a lot of benefits to that. You really refine your skills. But I think now as someone who owns their own business, I've had to teach myself a lot about business, bookkeeping, right, marketing, all the business end. I'm fortunate that I worked for large companies and got a lot of on-the-job training, but I definitely think it was a good decision on your part to pick up the business degree as well.
Right. I think it's been, tremendous to have both the practical experience and the business experience, by doing both. And like you said, a lot of the stuff where at least when you're doing the business part of it, you get a taste of the marketing, marketing courses, basic business principles, statistics, stuff that you're going to need, eventually, especially if your end game is to own your own business. These are tools that you're definitely going to need to grow and to make sure that your business is in essence running successfully or as efficient as possible.
So what was your first job when you got out of culinary school then? Like for the second time?
So when you graduated in 98, my first job was in Virginia for the Hyatt Corporation, working in their restaurant and their outlets. I was there for a year, and then I had to pivot a year later and had to move back to New Jersey for some family stuff. And at that time, IT, again, the business aspect kind of got into me, was the big thing back then. So I kind of made a jump, obviously with the help of my parents to move back. They said, okay, you can go to tech school. So that's kind of the deal. And then did that. And then I actually got into, like point of sale, I guess, or the infancy of what now is Open Table. We all know what Open Table is, right?
Yeah.
So I was with actually the company that first came out before Open Table, which was Food Line. And they started out in restaurants in the New York City market, as well as the Boston market, because they were based out of Boston. But the majority of the business was actually in New York City. So did that, actually got sick with meningitis, and I was out for like a month. And then when I came back, unfortunately, that company started to fold, and then they phased out, and Open Table is what it is today, in essence. And then from there, I worked in hotels for the Hilton Corporation, and then in other organizations as well. A mix of hotels, and then I also did some stuff like with IT, more in the point of sale aspect of things.
Yeah, you have quite a career path in a short period of time.
Yeah, I'm kind of a renaissance man, I guess, at this point. It's helped. It's been a blessing and a curse, I will say. Because you always get the question, you always kind of jumped around and doing this and that. Why is that? At the end of the day, and you can agree with me or disagree with me, you have to make moves which best for you. But at the same time, especially with these big companies, you're a number, you're replaceable. So you got to do what you have to do to grow.
Yeah, I mean, you're a family man. You've got a wife and kids. I know what that's like. I feel like you've had a little struggle with like the making money and the job and the career versus passion. I think like you go back and forth a little bit. Like you'll take a job because you need it and the pay and the benefits are good, but like it's not quite what you want to do. And then you'll find that thing for a little bit and do that. And then maybe you have to pivot again, right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think it's like, again, you have to do what you have to do. And then it's always just trying to reinvent yourself and putting stuff out there. I think, timing is everything. I've kind of, as much as I've had all these ideas and things going on, I think really timing is everything. And it's just, I'm always tinkering, I guess you could say, on all my projects, on what I want and how I want it.
So what's your main job right now? What are you doing?
My main job is I work in logistics for a company called Wakefern, which is the parent company or umbrella company of ShopRite here in the tri-state area, which is a grocery store chain. It's actually New Jersey's largest employer. So that's what I do. And this is, post-Corona. Pre-Corona, I was in the food service industry more. I've been, I guess, let's say the last 5-6 years, I've been doing contract food service, primarily schools, but I've also had a stint in healthcare as well.
Was that your biggest job as far as overseeing kind of like a large program when you were working for them? Because I, as I recall, you had a pretty big area that you were responsible for.
Yeah, that's probably when I hit the director level or general manager level, depending on what contract food service company you work for. They're all different titles, but they're all the same thing. Yeah, that was probably the biggest, I guess, responsibility that I handled, from employees and staff to, volume, budgets, and all that stuff.
Was it very stressful?
Extremely. And it's probably the first job, I would say, where I had to bring work home all the time, or work was constantly on my mind. So it definitely took a toll on me mentally and physically as well. So, I had a little bit of a health scare at work in one of those roles, where I was actually stretchered out and had to go to the hospital. So
what was that? Was that like a stress-induced panic type thing, or some kind of physical?
Yeah, I think it was more anxiety than anything at the end of the day. Once all the tests were done, I think a lot of it was stress-induced and anxiety-filled. So, you just got to learn how to, and you're still learning how to channel those things and how to address it and how to alleviate it. It doesn't matter kind of what role you're in. You're always going to have stress in the workplace environment. It's just, managing it better.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I was 22 the first time I had something like that, and my legs went numb and I collapsed, and my wife, got me in the car, and I got to the hospital and they put me in a wheelchair. I was like, am I going to die? Like, I had never had a history of anxiety, at least that I understood, or anything
Right.
like that. And, you don't know if it's a heart attack. Like, I had no idea. I was like 22 and just realizing, that, that's what that was. But it took me a long time to even figure that out. And I spent the better part of 10 years, like, with health issues all related to stress, almost exclusively linked to my jobs, which sucks.
Right. And you don't ever want it to be that way, and that's kind of like the thing too. Like, when you're in that kind of environment, it's like, what do you do? Like, do you stick it out or do you move on?
Well, ultimately, I moved on. I mean, I had to quit my job. I mean, there's a number of reasons. I obviously wanted to take my own business, but it was the stress and the anxiety that was the tipping point for me. I mean, I realized my health was going downhill, and I just could not be in this environment that was toxic and be around horrible people and be stressed out every day. And it was taking a physical and mental toll on me. And I just decided it would be much better to leave and figure things out on my own than to deal with that all the time. I just couldn't do it anymore.
I mean, don't you find it kind of ironic though? And, the one thing that we have in common is that, we're not going to go into names of companies, but, they try to promote, the whole healthy quality of life thing. But, you kind of don't see that. You take your work home with you, you stress out about it, and if you do try to like vent out about it, it's almost like you're considered, you're being weak. And that's another thing in our industry. It's like, if you vent or you show any sort of weakness in our industry, it's like you're considered weak sauce or you're soft.
And I think one of the things is as you move up, you're a salaried employee. And I think that gets really hard, because what is the clear expectation as far as hours? When are you on and when are you off the clock? My boss would give me a loose schedule, which was, like 9 to 7 or something like that. But quite often I was expected to be in at 8 or sometimes 6 for an event, but that didn't mean I got off at 2, I want to talk about your background a little bit. So people can't see you here, so they might not know, but you are Filipino American.
Yes. First generation, both my parents immigrated here in the 70s. My mom in the stereotypical profession of nursing, and my father was an engineer by trade. So, but they are what I call, and I tell people, the ultimate American dream situations, where they came here with very little, but retired. Unfortunately, my dad passed away 5 years ago, but ended up all on at high levels. So it's something that I've strived to do, and that I'm still striving to do today, just to get to their level or exceed it.
So does that impact how you were raised? Like, what's the mindset of people who come over from another country? Like, what was the expectation on you as far as education, career? Was there pressures? Did you feel that it was different than maybe someone who came from, whose family had always been here?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, being that I was the first child here with my parents and stuff like that, I was the experimental child. So a lot of the value systems or core values that I was raised were, I would say 75% of like Filipino tradition, and then, 25% of immersing into the American way of life, where school was, that's it. That's your job. And I say that I'm blessed and lucky because a lot of this stuff was taken care of for me financially. I didn't have to worry about work as a teenager. I really didn't get my first job till I was 17, and it was kind of frowned upon by my father to work. Growing up, like, oh, why are you working? Like, you should be concentrating on getting into college, into school. So I only worked the summer, and then I went, concentrated on getting into college. It wasn't Harvard or some big name school. It ended up being Johnson and Wales. So I kind of threw them for a curveball when it was come to the decision making process of what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
Sounds very different than many of the stories I've heard, especially people who come over or are children of immigrants. Usually, I would say, what I'm used to hearing is the kids are expected to work. They're not that you didn't have a good work ethic, but that it's almost like the opposite. Like your parents didn't want you to work, where I think a lot of times the tables turned and the expectation is that you do work, that you might even have to financially help out, with the family. Right. But your parents obviously had good jobs where, they didn't need the financial help. But right. I think it's interesting that they didn't make you work to kind of like get your work ethic down at a young age.
Right. But, I think it's a blessing and a curse. Blessing being that it provides you opportunities to do things that maybe, some people wouldn't be able to do or get in. But it's also a curse because, you become heavily dependent on them, because you think, oh, they're going to fix everything. Where maybe you could have used those years to kind of troubleshoot and fix things on your own. And, that's kind of the advice that I gave my parents moving on with my brother, who, and we are day and night. So he started working from a young age. My parents were like, yeah, go for it at this point, and, he's been a lot better as far as adjusting to, I guess, adult life versus me. I didn't really learn how to balance a checkbook till I was in my 20s, and then, budgeting and stuff like that. There was no budget when I was in school. That. So,
no budgeting whatsoever, as opposed to me being the cheapest person you ever met.
Yeah. I mean, and I tell people to this day that you're the one who told me, who taught me how to live on basically at that time, minus the inflation, how to live on $5 a week, literally. So a lot of trial and error, a lot of things, but, these are things that I passed down to my parents to kind of so that, they wouldn't go through that with my brother. And my brother, I think, has, I guess, thrived better in his from early adulthood on than I did in that transition. So, not to say that things are easier now, but, I have a better grasp on it now, but it just took me longer to do.
Well, and everyone's different and everyone needs the path. I think you're happy with where you are now, and who knows, if you had done things differently, what would have happened. So, you can't look back. Obviously you can't change anything, but so right. Let's talk Filipino food, because that's something that really interests me. We're obviously kind of having a boom in interest, right? Like more Filipino restaurants are opening up here in the DC area, Bad Saint. We have places like Kuya Jaws. And just talking to you, and I remember saying, why aren't there Filipino restaurants? And this is a conversation, like 20 years ago. And you just said you didn't think that it would fly, that the American palate wasn't there for it, and that the Filipino people would never go out for it because they would just eat, in their homes and home style. So did you see any kind of moment where it started to pop or anything?
I think for me, two people, Andrew Zimmern and Anthony Bourdain. I think they're kind of the, if I had to give credit to anybody, it would be them to kind of put it on, on a mainstream level. or at least introduce it to the country. I know out west, because of the populations out west, there have been, Filipino restaurants. They kind of had a head start on it.
Yeah, we had a large population in Seattle. Like I had a bunch of Filipino women who worked for me, but I don't even remember having a restaurant out there. There might have been, but
and then, typically here, Filipino restaurants have just been what they call a turo. So you kind of point and choose, almost like a cafe, like you're almost eating in a, residence hall. Like it's like a buffet style, and you just point and choose what you want. Nothing was made a la carte, and it's typically like the main staples of basic 101 Filipino food. And then maybe they'll throw in something that they normally wouldn't throw in. So that's as far as they got it. But, in recent years now, like you said, with the Bad Saints, I think Purple Yam in DC is another one. And then out here in New York City, Maharlika, which was one, and then Jeepney, I guess is the other, the big name, I guess, right now in the New York City area. They've kind of led the progression as far as Filipino food on this side, I guess, of the coast.
yeah, I remember you talked about your grandmother. I thought it was really interesting that you brought up your grandmother, and then it was like pancakes, which, I'm sure she made, but I always think of your grandmother as someone who always was making this really amazing Filipino food. And now in hindsight, I wish I spent more time eating her food. She'd get so bent out of shape. She would get up in the morning and make this food. And then we're like, nah, we're like going to New York City today because that's what we wanted to do when we were in our 20s. I think I've even mentioned on this podcast, I think the very first time that I had shrimp with the head on was at your house. It's crazy because you see it all the time now, but even as like a 21-year-old, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, I didn't even know. I was in culinary school and I'd never even seen a shrimp with the head on till we had them at your house. And also the fact that she would put things with bones in them, like in a bun type thing. And I remember having some kind of like bun and biting in, and there was like a big like short rib bone or something in the middle, or
right.
chicken bone. I thought that was so
like a bao bun.
Yeah. So interesting.
So, yeah, it is. I definitely, regret not spending enough more time with my grandmother, because she definitely is a vast of knowledge. I know she has recipes lying around that, when the time is right, I definitely want to try and bring back or try. I mean, my grandmother is the type of person where she didn't scale anything. She kind of just did it. But the crazy part is, it was consistently like good or like the same. Mm-hmm. So that's the crazy part. I couldn't like figure it out for the life of me, being that I come from a pastry background and everything has to be measured and precise, and then here's this, old lady just making stuff, and every single time, like, it comes out perfect. And I could never figure out, her secret to that.
That's the old school. And to anyone out there listening, I think you have to, if you're interested in keeping up with your family recipes and traditions, like I would say, get them nailed down. With my mom, that was something that I did, was looking at our family recipe saying, well, this says between a half and a third of a pound. How much are you really using? Or it says like a little over, a cup and a half of. And I really wanted, because I'm kind of meticulous like that, like getting the numbers of how my mom was doing it.
Especially if you want, like, for consistency purposes. And you want it to be, consistent always. So getting those numbers down, I think, is important.
Now, you had started doing some catering of Filipino food in the past couple of years. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we were doing traditional, and then I joined up with another chef that Jeff Wiersbicki, doing Fil Amazing Foods. It's another concept that we've been trying to get off the ground. Again, it's all timing. We did a couple of things together, but this is more of like, I guess, a cross of traditional and, he has a Argentinian background and Polish background. And then, our American background as well, kind of doing the fusion thing with it. And he's real creative with a lot of that stuff. And then I was doing some desserts and kind of modernizing them. I don't want to say bastardizing it, but more, I guess, making it a little bit more modern.
Would you say more approachable, maybe?
Yeah, I would say more approachable. I don't want to go too exotic or too crazy with it to the point where it's no longer, the essence of what it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know one of the things was Jeff's a big soccer fan, and like he was doing a lot of. Did you ever go with him to do the tailgates?
The tailgates, I didn't get to go with him, but I've done house parties with him, and we did a couple like one-off events as well together. So he's the mad scientist behind a lot of the savory stuff. I kind of throw in my 2 cents with it, but then he's the one who kind of like polishes it up, and we go with it.
But then shortly thereafter, you started doing your own dessert business.
Yeah, that kind of almost like an accident type thing. Like, I was baking, and then my daughter's cheer team at the time, we were gonna do like giveaways. So we did, like customized cookies, and then from there, I got inquiries about doing them for other, dance schools, cheer teams, etc. And then it evolved into like, hey, do you do cupcakes? And then do you do custom cakes? And I was doing that for like the past year up to the point of Corona, where we had a little bit of, traction and momentum going into it. But after Corona, things kind of just dried up for me. And then, with the life and work change for me, it definitely affected it immensely, to the point now where I'm still trying to figure out, what my next move is going to be with KCBs, and I know you and I have had this discussion too about baking part-time, where I kind of have to figure it out. Like, is it really worth it, the time that I'm putting in, and what am I getting out of it at the end of the day? So, and also the competition here in this area alone is crazy with, I guess, if you want to call it home bakers or people doing it on the side that you're competing with.
Yeah, I would say roughly here in Frederick, there's probably a minimum of 10. Like if today someone said, I need someone to make me cakes or cookies or whatever, I could probably have a list of 10 people in half an hour who could do it. It seems like everyone is a cottage baker these days. And not to knock cottage bakery, but there's a lot of people doing it because I think there's, it's a lower cost to entry kind of thing.
And it's kind of crazy here too with what you're competing with, because in New Jersey there are no cottage laws. They're still trying to pass the cottage law in Congress or Senate right now, the Home Baker Bills Act, and they've been trying to battle that for, I would say, the last 5 years that I've known about it. Anyways, I'm sure it's more.
So you're not allowed to bake out of your house right now?
We're not. So I have to look for places willing to let me bake stuff out of. So that that's usually a church with a commercial kitchen, and you throw them either some free food or a donation of some sort, or if there's a commercial kitchen that's willing to let you to do stuff after hours. So that was another challenge for me too. I was lucky to hook up with some commercial kitchens, but now with coronavirus, they're just not open, or they shut down. So that's my other thing of trying to get back into things is that. And honestly, it's a headache looking every week. You're lining up all these orders. Maybe it's only 1 or 2 orders a week, and then you're sinking a certain amount of your overhead into renting a place. So it's like, okay, am I going to do this because I'm evening out, or I'm making very little profit on this? I don't know how some of these home bakers do it. I'm assuming that for most of these people, it's supplemental, but I don't know, like how a lot of people are, making huge profits from doing this just on a part-time level.
Yeah, I've talked to a few of them, and that's what I'm always interested in, is how many people are just doing it as a side gig as opposed to full-time and really need that income. A lot of people, no one in particular I'm talking about, but a lot of people have a spouse who's making a decent amount of money. It's hard when you're working a job making $50,000 to $70,000 a year to rip the Band-Aid off and say, like, I'm going to start making cakes and cupcakes and cookies. Like, that's right. How long can you ever get to that salary level just doing that?
And I feel that's a lot of the people that I compete with, is that, you have a lot of, and I don't want to generalize it, but I think, you have a lot of people who are stay-homes that can afford to price you out, because their spouse or whatever is making significant of, for some of them, I think it's just a little bit of income for them, but I think for a lot of them, it's more they truly enjoy it, and it's more of a passion project for some of these people.
Personal
So,
chefs too. Personal chefs too. These people doing these $30 dinners. See it all the time.
it's tough and it's frustrating, but what I really want to charge, it's because I believe in my product and from the quality of ingredients that I use and the time that I put into it. So it's frustrating when I see what I can do versus what some other people are doing, and they're pricing you out. And some people will price me out by like $1. It's crazy.
And at some point, you just can't worry about that, right? I mean, you have to worry about it because it's your competition. But I don't discuss pricing with customers as far as it relates to competitors. When people say I'm shopping around, or well, I've seen other people who charge 50. I just say, well, I can't speak to that. I have no idea what their circumstances are, the quality of their products, or any of that. I just know, here's my experience. Here's what you're going to get, and this is the cost. And I totally understand if that's not in your price range. And it's worked out for me.
I think it's just sticking to your guns and saying, this is what I do, and this is where I'm at, where I need to be in order for it to be worth it for me. It's like, if I want to put the time and effort, I need to get something out of it, especially if it's something that I'm not doing full time. It's something to supplement. You have to try to maximize your time and your effort, because you're taking away from, time that's off where you could either be resting or spending time with your family. So, lesson learned is just, stick to your guns and stick to your price points. If you really like something or if you're really into it, you'll pay for it. I see it all the time. And I see it with your business, and you have repeat customers. You stick to your guns, you've been doing it, and you have repeat customers. If they really like you and they really like your product, they're going to use it no matter what.
Yep. I never want to be the cheap guy. There's always the cheap guy. There's always the Walmart of whatever. And
right.
I think at that level you have to trade on volume, and I just don't want to be trading on volume and making it another, food's already a commodity, but it doesn't need to be even further commoditized, in my opinion.
Do I want to do volume, or do I want to do smaller, more intimate orders and stuff like that, but at the right price point? So these are things that I'm still trying to figure out.
And if you never get back to baking, would you be okay with that? Like, do you self-identify as a pastry chef or a baker? And, because I have that conversation with people a lot of times, that how, like, we kind of get tied to our thing, and you've kind of bounced all over different industries. Would you be okay with just never baking again? At least as a full-time, like if you just did it as like a little side thing, would that be enough for you?
Yeah, I think I'd be okay with it. I think going into it full-time would be very difficult, because you're in essence going to be starting over again from the bottom. And it's something that financially just does not make any sense for me at this point in my life. And at this point in my life, I'm okay with where I'm at. Baking will always be there. Food will always be there. If I want to do it, I can do it at any time, I feel. It's just it's all timing and the right opportunity. I don't want to jump into it just to jump into it. I think this whole pandemic has kind of made me think things through or think things over, that, I need to start doing things that's right for me, right for my family. And that, I get maximum opportunity and, bottom line from it.
Well, I'd say it's not too late to start, even in your 40s. But so let's say you're going to go back and give advice, because we have a lot of people who are younger. What would you say people should maybe do, like if they wanted to start their own small desserts business, and you could start over? What kind of advice would you give?
First things first, and we could tie this into culinary school, is before you invest any sort of money into culinary school or any food business, is work in the industry. Work at a Starbucks, work at a bakery of some sort, get that experience, do your research. I think that's the one thing that I regret not doing, is working in the industry before jumping into culinary school. Again, I don't regret anything that I've done or how I've done it. But if I had to do it over again, and that's what I tell any young person trying to go into this industry is work in it first. If you can stand, almost working 7 days a week, long hours, working through holidays, sacrificing time with your friends, the lifestyle. If you can handle that, then sink the money into culinary school to refine your skills. But I don't necessarily think that you need to go to culinary school to become a successful chef nowadays, especially when technically you could get your education on YouTube, which is kind of scary. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing all these culinary schools now where they say you can get your culinary degree online, which I think is, like I said, scary.
Yeah, I agree. Seeing how people are doing culinary schools virtually as well. But I get sometimes like Facebook ads from Johnson & Wales saying, get your degree. And I'm thinking, what kind of coursework? I mean, if I'm going to pay for it. So I think you get what you pay for, right? Like watching YouTube videos is fantastic. You're not getting feedback, I think, is the big thing you're missing. So you can definitely play around at home. And, I don't want to use play as a negative term. You can definitely teach yourself a lot because I'm a big, believer in being self-taught somewhat. But I think what you miss is that, having a chef try it and give you really critical feedback. I think that's the difference between like being, I'm using my hands, but like being here and taking it to the next level. And I think that's the difference between, do you want to go be the executive pastry chef at, a fine dining restaurant versus, making cakes for a bakery. I don't think you necessarily need to go to culinary school for that.
And I think too, like, being that we didn't have the resources that are out there now, you were really limited on what you could do with your degree.
We're so old that we predate the internet.
Right. It's crazy, right? But yeah, like, I mean, when we came out of school, you either went to a hotel, you worked in a restaurant, a resort, a cruise ship, where contract food service was like, no, you kind of go out there like when you're at the tail end of your career, they kind of discouraged you, I felt, from going that route, which I think, if I found out about contract food service, earlier and the things you could do in it, I would have probably jumped on that a lot sooner just because of the lifestyle that you could get out of it.
Well, that's really interesting because I went right into contract food service right out of culinary school. I didn't even understand it, though. It wasn't really discussed. Like I went to work at a retirement community that was run by Compass at the time, and I didn't even understand the fact that like the bosses I worked for a different company than who I was getting my paycheck from. At 22, I still didn't even get that. It wasn't something I'd even really explored, but I jumped right into that. I think it's a double-edged sword because looking back on it, I kind of wish I didn't. I got into it because I needed a higher paying job. They paid much better than independent restaurants and they had benefits. Another thing, like, I needed health insurance, and who doesn't want 2 weeks paid vacation? But the challenge is you don't really get the same kind of experience. I think it would have been good for me to move around a little bit more than I did instead of like getting into contract food service and kind of staying there for such a long period.
And I guess that's where the benefit of moving around, like for me, from both, industries and from places that I was able to learn and grasp certain things and take with me into other situations. So, where you kind of had more of a steady flow of, places you were at and where I've kind of been like all over the place, that's, I guess, where I guess you could have benefited from moving around a little bit more. Not to do what I did, but, maybe if you went to 2 other places or whatever, maybe you would have done something or in a different light, whether it's working in a restaurant or some other realm of food service.
Well, and this doesn't just necessarily happen in contract food service, but I do feel like there's less mentorship. There's more of an expectation that you are an independent worker, meaning, there's less of a hierarchy. Like you have a director and then an executive chef, and then everyone under that is expected to really work at a higher level without training. Like I was brought in as essentially like a line cook and became a sous chef like within 6 months, which is insane. Like I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have the culinary skills, even though I went to culinary school, and I definitely didn't have the leadership. And I see that over and over as they just like move you up through the ranks. And then, next thing you know, your executive chef is fired. And because you're the sous chef, they move you up. And who doesn't want to be an executive chef? But again, like at 24, are you really ready to be an executive chef? And I don't know that you see that in restaurants as much. Maybe you do, but.
Well, I also think too that like the quality of personnel that you have in contract food service versus hotels and restaurants is tenfold. I feel that in restaurants and in hotels and stuff like that, you have people who actually want to be there and kind of like learn and work their way and don't mind working their way up and through different stations versus somebody who's in contract food service. I mean, the quality of employees, rarely do I get somebody that's, I guess, truly culinary trained or who wants to be there. For a lot of these people, it's just, it's a job to them. It's cooking. How hard can that be? I cook at home or, I bake at home. So I think that has a lot to do as far as growth opportunities and why you probably advanced so quickly.
Yeah. Again, people want to go there because of the benefits and things that come along with that. They don't necessarily want to be there to learn. Something I've always wanted to do is in the places that I was at, especially if I was in a leadership position, was making sure that we had a really good training program. And I let them know the expectation was that like, this is going to be kind of like a restaurant. Like I want you to learn. I want you to ask questions. We're always going to be innovating. If you came here to kind of like live out your final days in a kitchen or just because you need a job, this isn't really what I'm looking
for you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think as long as you establish that point, and I'm sure there are chefs in contract food service who run things similarly or do it like you do. But, there are a lot of places where it's like, no, because they know what they're getting. So it's like almost like, why bother? I think a lot of people who go into contract food service are frustrated and burnt out, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. It's also a very different animal because looking at the restaurant world these days and all the, seeing what's happening in restaurants, like we're finally talking about it, especially in the media, whether it be sexual harassment or just harassment, kitchen life, kitchen lifestyles. It's very different in contract food. I think the biggest thing for me is I've always had an on-site HR department everywhere I've worked, which is not something you're seeing in independent restaurants. Like I can't imagine throwing things at employees or swearing at them or harassing them. Like it just wouldn't fly. And, I'm just kind of surprised at how long these things are going on in kitchens just because I didn't come up with that. I was never I don't think I've ever worked in a place that didn't have an HR department literally in the building.
Yeah. And that's the thing that you can only hope with this next generation and crop of food service professionals is that, that they're learning that, they're the ones who can change the culture and the old school way of life, I guess, in our industry. And you're starting to see it to happen with all these lawsuits and, people coming out and calling out, I guess more the celebrity chefs because they're the easy target at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think the culture definitely has to change in order for that stuff, to happen on that side of things. I think, you can never get away with it from the contract food service just because, like you said, there's always HR or something to take control of that situation.
Yeah. I'm appreciative of it though, but working for those companies, you also learn how to properly interview people, hire them, God forbid, fire them. But, working people through the coaching process and the eval process, having to I had to give employees a 90-day, a 6-month and an annual evaluation. And that's a lot when you have so many employees. I mean, a lot of times I felt like I was just locked in my office doing evaluations for hours on end. But I think that's something you don't do if you're the executive chef at a restaurant. How often are you doing evals for, your cooks?
It's either you can do it or you can't. From what I've heard, it's like, I have friends and family who are on the restaurant side of things, and it's like they can either do the job or not, and then it's a very simple decision. It's either today's your last day or you're staying, versus, us in contract food service where we've worked, everything is a process. You can't just say, you stink, see you later, there's a door. well, you're really lacking here. Let's try retraining you again. If that doesn't work, then, we're going to have to talk to you again. If that doesn't work, then we have to, write you up.
It's a blend, because I do think there are times that you need to move someone out of the job faster than you can. Right. I'm not one to fire someone right away, but I also feel to be honest, I left my last job because of toxic employees who worked for me, my subordinates, and we weren't able to move them out. I would go to the HR department all the time talking about the issues, and they just were not comfortable with terminating the employees based on the evidence. And right. I just, and
that's a challenge that I had, is with hiring and firing, is like, you want to put the right people in place, but you can't, because you're stuck with people that, HR said you can't fire, or this person has been here 20 years. Like, what are they doing so wrong now? It's like, maybe it's just people have turned a blind eye and not seen it. And me being the new guy, I'm seeing this stuff, and stuff needs to be done. So that's kind of the frustration that I've had in roles like that, where you're trying to change the culture and trying to do things, but then, it almost becomes political, mm-hmm. and discouraging, and makes your job that much more difficult. And, you're trying to create a path to success for you, but when you can't make the changes that you need to, and you're not getting the support from your upper managers, it's difficult.
All things I'm really glad I'm not doing right now. As much as I love being a mentor and a leader in the kitchen, it's been kind of a nice break not having over 100 employees that reported to me.
Yeah. So, and you seem a lot happier, doing what you're doing, and I'm truly happy for you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I love it. And the podcasting thing's been a lot of fun too. So
that's good, and I'm glad to see that it's gaining traction every time.
So one of my favorite questions is, what are some of your favorite resources, whether it be culinary resources, physical tools, cookbooks, websites? What are some things you love and want to share?
I like to go to, YouTube is really good. But I like looking more for like professional chefs, like to see what they're doing. As far as certain techniques and stuff like that, like professional techniques. My favorite pastry chef of all time is Pierre Hermé from France. So anytime he has some new material or anything new, even his old stuff, I still watch over and over to this day, just because I really dig his classic style. But he's made classic look modern, without compromising the old school, I guess, flair of things. And then anything I hear about, any of the trends that I hear about, I'll try to look it up and stuff like that. So social media has been very helpful in that aspect. Books, Flavor Bible, definitely something that I still refer to.
Another plug for the most popular book on this podcast.
And then I love reading stuff from like Julia Child still, like the classics, Julia Child, Jacques Pepin. I've always admired him from a savory standpoint, because their technique, and watching their technique, as old school as it is, it's the basics, it's the foundation. And it's the foundations that are going to get you far in this industry. One of the things that kind of aggravates me is you see all these kids or these younger chefs who, they'll do their 2-year stint or 3-year stint in culinary school, or not even. They'll watch a couple YouTube videos and think they're, automatically the master of doing something. But it's like, do you know the foundations behind it? Like, can you just bake me like a plain, for example, bake me a cookie, or from a savory standpoint, make me scrambled eggs. Like, can you do those fundamental things? Are you seasoning right? Are you measuring right?
Yeah. I mean, I would see it, there was a lot of discussion about that during the real boom of molecular gastronomy. It's like, I would get these young cooks come in and they would want to learn to do all that stuff, but they couldn't properly roast a chicken or cook a steak, like make me a medium rare steak, and they would either overdo it or underdo it, and not being able to season things, not being able to properly caramelize onions, but they want to do all this stuff with the hydrocolloids, which seems cool, but like you don't even have the fundamentals down.
It's like, like with the sous vide machines, like, do you really know what you're doing with that? And then some of the tools that some of the people, like some of the home chefs buy, it's like, you don't really need that. Like there are other things before you even get into that. Sometimes the most basic tool will get you there. So those are kind of, I guess I'm the old man on the lawn now with
maybe a little
bit, but it's stuff like that aggravates me. I guess for people like us who've kind of put in the time and the effort, and then, you just kind of see, the younger people kind of go in and think they know it all.
The last guest I had on the podcast, Monica Glass, who's a pastry chef, she said her favorite tools are her hands and her senses. Really, she said, my favorite thing is working with my hands. You're working with the dough. How does it feel? Visually, how does it look? Just, it wasn't like some fancy kitchen tool. It was just what we're given,
Yeah, in essence, baking really is, your tools to get you to where you need is your senses, and then a heat source at the end of the day. Basic baking 101, if you want to do it, is like bread. Mm-hmm. You don't really need a mixer to make bread. You just need the ingredients and then a heat source. Things can be done, and you don't necessarily need the latest and greatest thing to get it done.
No, I agree. Well, do you have any parting words before we get out of here today?
Just thanks for having me on. It's you're doing a great thing for the industry. Hopefully you hear from my concepts, which is KCB's, which is the baking concept, and Fil Amazing Foods, which I do with Chef Jeff, which is our Filipino fusion food. So hopefully after this coronavirus pandemic, whatever you want to call it, ends, I'll have a firm grasp on the direction on what we're doing with these things. Yep.
It's just been a year of kind of laying low and planning. I'm with you. Well, we'll be sharing, I'll still be sharing all the info in the show notes so people will know where to find you, and they will be informed when you pop back up with your desserts and your Filipino food.
Sounds good, man. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And to all of our listeners, this has been the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. As always, you can find us at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org and on all social media platforms. Thanks so much and have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.